In the name of God, who is most gracious and most merciful, I am Zubair Khan and you are watching my vlog. On 20th October, some shortcomings were pointed out in the Al Jazeera video, which contained visuals to understand attack on Ahli Gaza hospital. Al Jazeera is Qatar-based media network and one could sense its tendency towards Palestinians. On 22nd October, CNN has also published a report about this incident. Since CNN is American news multinational, as such one can sense its tendency towards Israel. Prior to developing its story, the CNN itself accepted that validity of its findings are not perfect. It writes, without the ability to access the site and gather evidence from the ground, no conclusion can be definitive. But CNN's analysis suggests that a rocket launched from within Gaza broke up mid-air and that the blast at the hospital was the result of part of the rocket landing at the hospital complex. Weapons and explosive experts with decades of experience assessing bomb damage who reviewed the visual evidence also cautioned the absence of munition, remnants or shrapnel from the scene made it difficult to be sure. From many experts which CNN referred in its report, the most pertinent is an explosive specialist who is currently working in law enforcement and was not authorized to speak to the press. He said it is likely that the shrapnel from the projectile ignited the fuel and flammable liquid in the cars, which is why the fireball was so big. These kinds of explosions generate a shock wave that is particularly deadly to children and those frail or weak people. The same specialist who has spent decades conducting forensic investigations in conflict zones and that also around the world, he said the damage at the crater site and the scene was not in harmony with damage normally seen at an utterly shelling site. He further said, without knowing what kind of projectile produced the crater, it is difficult to draw conclusions about the direction that it came from. However, the debris and ground markings point to few possibilities. He said there are dark patches on the ground fanning out in a southwesterly direction from the crater. The trees behind it are scorched and lamp post is entirely knocked over. In contrast, the trees on the other side of the crater are still intact even with green leaves. This would be consistent with a rocket approaching from the southwest. A rocket scorched and damaged the earth on approach to the ground. This is the specialty or the peculiar characteristics of a rocket which he is mentioning, that whenever a rocket hits the ground, then it scorches and damages the earth on the direction from where it is approaching the ground. If the munition was artillery, however, these markings could indicate it came from the northeast, spewing debris to the southwest. But if the projectile malfunctioned and broke apart in the air, as CNN analysis suggests, the direction of impact reflected by the crater would not be a reliable finding. In its analysis, the CNN further writes, Israel has presented two contrasting narratives on which direction the alleged Hamas rocket flew in from. In an audio recording released by the Israeli officials, which they say is Hamas operative discussing the blast and attributing it to a rocket launched by the Islamic Jihad from a cemetery behind the hospital, is referenced as the launch site. CNN analyzed satellite imagery for the days prior to the attack and found no apparent evidence on a rocket launch site there. CNN could not verify the authenticity of this audio intercept. The Israeli Defense Forces also published a map indicating the rocket had been launched several kilometers away from a southwesterly direction, showing the trajectory towards the hospital. The map is not detailed, but it indicates a rocket launch site that matches a location CNN has previously identified as a Hamas training site. Satellite imagery from this site indicates some activity in the days prior to the hospital blast, but CNN cannot determine whether a rocket was launched from there and has also asked the IDF for more details about this map. At the end of this write-up, the CNN admits until an independent investigation is allowed on the ground and evidence collected from the site, the prospect of determining who was behind the blast is very remote. Now, dear viewers, anyone having not full grip of all the details is likely to flow along with the narrative of the CNN. And I am sure whosoever will read this can conclude that Israeli or US narrative is correct. However, having 2 decades of experience in weapons and explosive, I once again say, as it has been concluded by the CNN also, that unless independent and transparent investigation is allowed on the ground and for forensic testing evidence collected from the site, the culprit behind the blast will be impossible to determine.